Part 1. The Attic, the Box, and the Smell of Forgotten Places. The summer Milo Ashwood turned 10 was the summer his grandfather died, and the summer Milo stopped drawing. Those two things were connected, though Milo hadn't admitted it to anyone, not even his mother. Before Grandpa Jasper died, Milo drew everything. The oak tree in the backyard, with its 3 crooked branches, the face of his teacher, Mrs. Pelletier, who had a nose shaped exactly like a cashew, the view from his bedroom window on rainy days when the world went silver and soft. He drew in the margins of his homework. He drew on the condensation of cold glasses. Once, memorably, he had drawn an entire underwater city on the back of a church bulletin during a particularly long sermon, and his mother had confiscated it, but kept it pinned above her desk for a year. But after Grandpa Jasper was gone, the pencil stayed in the cup on his desk, and the sketchbook stayed on the shelf, and Milo stayed mostly on his bed, or the couch, or wherever seemed farthest from having to explain why everything felt the same and completely different at the same time. It was his mother who finally said, "We need to sort through Grandpa's things." Not in a mean way. She said it the way she said most hard things, gently, with a cup of tea already made and waiting on the kitchen table. "I thought maybe you'd want to help. He always said he was saving certain things for you." So that was how Milo found himself on a hot Thursday in July, climbing the narrow stairs to his grandfather's attic, with dust motes floating in the slanted light and the smell of old paper and something sweeter, like dried oranges and ink. Grandpa Jasper's house was a narrow, tall house on Fenwick Street that leaned slightly to the left, as if it were perpetually listening to something. The attic occupied the whole top floor, and there was simply no other word for it, magnificent. Bookshelves ran from floor to ceiling on every wall. There were rolled-up papers in tubes, and flat papers in folders, and papers pinned directly to boards that leaned against tables. There were instruments Milo couldn't name, brass compasses with many arms, strange magnifying devices, a wooden box that hummed faintly when you walked near it. There was a globe that Milo recognized as Earth's cousin, but not quite Earth. The landmasses were shifted, rearranged, like someone had picked up the continents while they were still soft and set them down somewhere new. And maps everywhere. Milo had always known his grandfather made maps, a cartographer. Grandpa Jasper had always said, with the air of a man who finds his own job title quietly hilarious, a fancy word for someone who draws pictures of where things are. But Milo had never quite understood the scale of his grandfather's work until now, standing in the attic, turning slowly, unable to look at everything at once. Some of the maps were of real places: London, the Sahara, the deep trenches of the Pacific, but others were of places Milo didn't recognize at all. A city on the back of a turtle the size of an island, a mountain range that formed the shape of a sleeping woman when seen from above, a forest where the trees were labeled with names like the remembering oak and the tree that argues and sorrow pine do not approach in rain. Milo. His mother's voice floated up the staircase. There should be a green box up there somewhere. Grandpa specifically mentioned it. Said it had your name on it. Milo looked around. Green box. Green box. He found it tucked under a drafting table in the far corner. An old wooden box painted dark green, the color of deep forest, with tarnished brass latches, and Milo's name written across the top in his grandfather's handwriting. Not just his name, actually. Milo looked more closely. The full inscription read, "For Milo Ashwood, Cartographer's Apprentice, when he is ready." Milo sat down cross-legged on the dusty floor and opened the latches. Inside, nestled in dark velvet, were four things. A compass that looked ordinary, except for the fact that it had 8 directions instead of 4, and the extra 4 were labeled with words instead of letters. True, false, almost, and perhaps. A small ink bottle sealed with black wax, with a tag that said, "Mapmaker's Ink. Use only when certain." A leather journal, well worn, that turned out to be Grandpa Jasper's own logbook, filled with handwritten entries and small sketches that Milo would need a long time to read properly. A map, folded very precisely into a rectangle about the size of a paperback book. Milo picked up the folded map last. It was heavier than it looked. The paper had a texture he'd never felt before. Not quite paper, more like very thin skin and warm to the touch, as though it had been sitting in sunlight recently. He unfolded it carefully, once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, and it kept unfolding, which shouldn't have been possible given where he'd started, and when it was fully open it was roughly the size of his bedroom floor. It showed a place called the Between Place. Milo had never heard of it. He studied the map carefully. It showed a landscape that was dreamlike and strange, a patchwork of environments stitched together with visible seams like a quilt, a snowy tundra next to a tropical forest, next to what appeared to be a floating island, next to a vast library where the shelves extended as far as the map showed and probably further. In the center of the map was a location marked with a red X, and beside the X, written in his grandfather's careful hand, were 3 words: "The Heartstone," and at the bottom of the map in smaller writing, "I could not finish this. I hope you can." The world between worlds is forgetting itself, and only a true map can save it. Trust the compass. Trust your hand. Do not trust the hollow men. They will try to tell you the map is wrong. It is not wrong. You are not wrong. J.A. Milo sat very still for a long moment with the map spread across his lap and the afternoon sun cutting through the attic window in a long golden bar. Then, slowly, he reached into the green box and picked up the compass. The needle, which had been pointing vaguely toward perhaps, swung to point directly at the map, and the map began to glow. Part 2. Going through. Milo would later try to explain what happened next, and he would always fail. Language, he'd come to understand, was designed to describe things that other people had also experienced. When something had never happened to anyone else, or at least not to anyone who'd lived to describe it properly, the words simply weren't there. The best he could manage was this: the map opened. Not like a door opens. Not like a book opens. It opened the way a flower opens, slowly from the inside, becoming something 3-dimensional that it hadn't been before. The light from the map spilled out into the attic like warm water. It smelled of rain on hot stone and pine needles and the particular metallic smell of lightning just before it strikes. Milo, who was sitting on the map, went with it. He didn't fall. He didn't fly. He slid sideways out of one world and into another, the way you slide from sleep into waking and back again, that borderland that isn't quite either place. One moment he was in the attic with dust motes and brass instruments around him. The next moment he was somewhere else. He was standing on a cliff edge. Below him, spreading in every direction like the most extraordinary quilt he'd ever seen, was the Between Place. It was exactly like the map had shown it, and also entirely nothing like it, because a map is a drawing of a place and a place is a living thing, and the difference between them is the same as the difference between a recipe and a meal. The Between Place hummed. That was the first thing Milo noticed. a low, constant vibration, as if the whole world were a bell that had been struck a long time ago and was still resonating. The light was amber, not quite like sunset, not quite like sunrise, something in between. A few hundred meters away, a forest of silver trees stood very still. To his left, the landscape became icy and pale, great spears of translucent white rising from the ground. To his right, a village sat on an island suspended in the air with no visible support, trailing roots and vines like a slow waterfall. Directly in front of him, sitting on a rock and regarding him with the calm expression of someone who had been expecting him for exactly this long, and not a moment more, was a girl. She was about his age, perhaps a year younger, with dark brown skin, close-cropped hair that appeared to have actual threads of gold woven through it, and eyes that were slightly too bright, lit somehow from behind like a lantern. She wore a jacket covered in small pockets, most of them visibly stuffed with things, and her boots were the red of autumn maples. "You're Jasper's," she said. Not a question. "He was my grandfather," Milo said, because that felt more precise. "Right." The girl slid off her rock. She was shorter than him by several centimeters, but carried herself as though she were the taller of the two. "I'm Sage. I've been waiting." "How long?" She tilted her head. "Time is complicated here." "Long enough." She studied him with those two bright eyes. "Did you bring the map?" Milo looked down at his hands. He was still holding the folded map. It had come through with him, tucked somehow into his grip. He also had the compass, and he seemed to have picked up the small ink bottle without meaning to. It was in his jacket pocket. "Yes." "And the compass?" "Yes." Sage breathed out slowly. "Good. Then we have a chance." She turned and began walking away from the cliff edge, along a path Milo hadn't noticed before. It wound down through the rocks like a thought you'd been trying to have and finally caught. "Come on. I need to explain things before the Unmaker moves again, and that gives us maybe half a day." "The Unmaker?" Milo hurried after her. "All in good time. Watch that rock, it bites." Milo looked at the rock she'd indicated. It had teeth. He went around it. Part 3. The explanation. The beetle and the map that breathes. At the bottom of the cliff path was a shelter. Shelter being the most optimistic word for it. It was really 4 walls and a roof that had come to some kind of agreement about staying near each other, with a fire inside and a kettle that appeared to boil continuously and enthusiastically regardless of whether anyone had lit it. Sitting in the corner of the shelter, on a stump that seemed to have been upholstered in green velvet specifically for him, was the largest beetle Milo had ever seen. It was roughly the size of a rugby ball, with a shell that shifted between deep blue and dark green like an oil slick on water, 6 legs that ended in small, surprisingly delicate-looking hands, and a pair of round glasses balanced on its face, where, technically, a face shouldn't have been able to hold glasses at all. "Ah," said the beetle in a voice like old book pages. "The apprentice arrives. I had begun to wonder." "Codex, this is Milo," said Sage, dropping into a chair and pouring 2 cups of whatever was in the continuously boiling kettle. "Milo, this is Codex. He's been here longer than anyone. He knows things." "I know most things," Codex said with precision. "Not all things. Nobody should claim to know all things. All-knowing is the beginning of all foolishness." Milo sat down cautiously on the other chair, accepted the cup Sage offered. It tasted like warm apples and chamomile, and something he couldn't identify that made him feel immediately steadier, and said, "Can someone please explain what's happening?" They could. They did. It took a while, and Codex interrupted frequently with corrections and addendums, and what he called contextual clarifications. But eventually, Milo understood the following. The between place was real. It had always been real. It existed in the space between all the other worlds. The documented ones, the mapped ones, the places humans had named and measured and claimed to understand. It was made of the things those other worlds had forgotten, or hadn't yet found words for, or had only imagined so far. Lost languages, abandoned inventions, stories that had never been told, feelings that didn't have names. Every time something in the human world was truly forgotten, truly, finally, with no one left to remember it, it fell into the between place. That sounds sad, Milo said. It isn't necessarily, Codex said. Things forgotten in one world are remembered here. They are kept. The between place is, in many ways, the most complete place that exists. Every animal that went extinct, every language that died, every child's dream that never became anything. The beetle's voice, which had been quite academic up to this point, went a little softer. It's all here. Or it was, Sage said. She had her hands wrapped around her cup and her expression had gone careful and serious. That's the problem. The problem, as they explained it, was the unmaker. No one knew where it had come from. It had appeared in the between place roughly, and here Sage made an uncertain gesture with her hand. Some time ago. It was a creature that unmade things, not destroyed them. Unmaking was different from destroying. Codex explained. Destroying meant something was gone. Unmaking meant something had never been. The unmaker moved through the between place, and in its wake, things didn't cease to exist. They ceased to have existed. They were erased not just from now, but from before. That's terrifying, Milo said. Yes, said Codex simply. The between place was forgetting itself. Patches of it were going blank. White, empty, humming with the nothing sound of erasure. Every day the white patches grew. If the between place was entirely erased, every forgotten thing it contained would be unremade, gone from all worlds, forever, as if it had never been. And the Heartstone? Milo asked, because he'd been thinking about the red X on the map since he'd first seen it. Sage and Codex exchanged a look that contained a conversation Milo wasn't part of. The Heartstone, Codex said finally, is the anchor of the between place. It's what keeps the world cohesive, what stitches all the different patches together, what makes it real instead of just a collection of falling fragments. If the Heartstone is properly mapped, if someone draws a true, complete map of the path to its location and marks it correctly, it will become permanently fixed. The unmaker cannot unmake things that are truly correctly mapped. That is its one limitation. It can only erase what is unmeasured, unnamed, undocumented. Milo looked down at the map in his hands. My grandfather started this map. Your grandfather spent 30 years working on it, Codex said. He was a remarkable man. He came here many times. He mapped more of this place than anyone had done before. But the last section, the path to the Heartstone, he never completed. He always said he needed one more visit, one more survey. And then the beetle paused. And then he didn't come back. Milo's throat felt tight. He died. Yes. So I need to finish the map. Yes. Milo was quiet for a moment. He looked at the map again. Beautiful, detailed, his grandfather's life's work spread across its surface in delicate lines and careful notations. He looked at the blank section near the red X, the area Grandpa Jasper hadn't been able to fill in. I'm not as good at drawing as he was, Milo said. He meant it as a practical concern, not self-pity. He was a professional. I'm 10. He started mapping the between place when he was 9, Sage said, with a small smile that she seemed to be trying to keep small and not quite succeeding. Oh, Milo considered this. Okay then. He opened his grandfather's logbook to the first page and began to read. Part 4. The Silver Forest and What Lives There. They set out the next morning. Between place morning, which wasn't the same as any morning Milo had experienced before. The light changed, but gradually, like someone turning a dimmer switch with great patience. The amber deepened to a warm gold, and the silver trees of the forest ahead of them caught the light and threw it back in hundreds of small, brilliant points. Milo had studied his grandfather's logbook through what passed for the night. He'd learned about the silver forest. The trees were silver because they grew from the mineral deposits of forgotten songs, actual songs, melodies people had hummed and then forgotten, that had fallen here and crystallized into something beautiful. He'd learned about the hollow men, which his grandfather had warned him about in the map's inscription. They were creatures that looked like people but weren't. Smooth-faced, featureless, wearing the shapes of humans the way a coat can hang on a hook. They didn't speak. They only pointed, and the directions they pointed were always wrong. His grandfather had warned emphatically, "Do not follow a hollow man anywhere, ever, for any reason, no matter how convincingly it mimes urgency." He'd also learned about Sage, in a way. In his grandfather's last entries, the ones from his final few visits, Jasper had written about the girl made of map light and described her as the most reliable guide in the Between place, a creature native to this between world who understood its logic better than anyone from outside could. He'd written, "She is not human in the way we are human, but she is more truly herself than most humans manage. I trust her completely." Reading those words, Milo had felt something warm and complicated in his chest. "Ready?" Sage asked, shouldering a pack she'd produced from somewhere. Codex was perched on her shoulder with the dignity of someone who has decided that this is simply where he lives now and is not to be remarked upon. "Ready," said Milo. The Silver Forest was the strangest and most beautiful place Milo had ever been. The trees grew in no particular pattern, randomly spaced, as if someone had scattered seeds from above without looking. Their trunks were smooth and bright, and their leaves were thin as paper and translucent, so the light moved through them in shifting patterns on the forest floor. When the wind moved through, which it did frequently and with apparent playfulness, the leaves chimed, not metallically, not harshly, a soft, musical chiming, like wind chimes made by someone who really understood music. "Listen," Sage said softly, stopping at the edge of the forest. Bit like a shy cat. Milo listened. Under the chiming of the leaves, there was something else. A fainter sound, coming from the trees themselves. He stepped closer to the nearest silver trunk and pressed his ear against it. He could hear music. Not one melody, but many, layered over each other, some slow and some fast, some in major keys that sounded like dancing, and some in minor keys that sounded like rain. All of them were half familiar, the way something can feel familiar in a dream, the way a face that belongs to no one you know can still seem like an old friend. "The forgotten songs," he said. Yes. Sage was watching him with those bright eyes. People hum them in their kitchens, in their cars, while they do the dishes. They don't remember where they heard them. Sometimes they don't even notice they're doing it. But when the last person who carries a melody forgets it entirely, it falls here and becomes a tree. And becomes a tree. She touched the bark gently, with 2 fingers. "This one sounds like a lullaby. A very old one, probably. The older the melody, the deeper the roots." Milo took out his pencil. He'd found, with a small shock of recognition, that there was a pencil tucked into the inside pocket of his jacket, as if it had always been there, and began to sketch. Not for the map, not yet. Just to remember. He drew the shape of the trees, the pattern of the light, the way Sage stood with her hand against the bark. His hand moved without him exactly deciding to move it, the way it used to before Grandpa Jasper died, when drawing was just something he did without thinking about doing it. Codex, watching from Sage's shoulder, said nothing but made a small satisfied sound. They were 3 hours into the silver forest when they found the white patch. It was in a clearing, an area roughly the size of a tennis court, where the silver trees simply stopped. Not because anything had cleared them. The stumps weren't there. The fallen wood wasn't there. They had simply ceased to be, and the ground where they'd stood was a pale, luminous white, perfectly flat, perfectly smooth, humming faintly with that terrible nothing sound. And at the edge of the white patch, standing very still, was the largest hollow man Milo had seen. He'd seen a few in the distance as they walked, blurry human-shaped smudges at the edge of perception, never quite coming close. This one was close. It was about the height of an adult, featureless as a shop mannequin, and it was looking directly at them, or aimed at them, since looking implied eyes, and one smooth arm was raised, pointing into the forest. "Don't look at it," Sage said, her voice very steady. "Don't follow its direction. Just keep moving forward." "Where does it want us to go?" "Toward the white. Always toward the white." They heard things into the unmaker's territory. That's what they do. She stepped sideways, giving the hollow man and its white patch a wide berth, and Milo followed. The hollow man turned slowly to track them as they moved, arms still extended, pointing. Milo did not follow. They left it behind, and after a few minutes, the forest's music swelled again around them, as if compensating for the silence of that terrible white clearing, and Milo's heart rate slowly came back down to something normal. "How big are the white patches getting?" he asked. Sage was quiet for a moment. "When I first noticed them, they were the size of rooms. Now the largest ones are the size of fields." A pause. "When your grandfather first told me about the map, about the Heartstone, the white covered maybe 1/100th of the Between place. Now it covers closer to a quarter." Milo thought about that. A quarter of all the forgotten things in the world. Unremade. Gone not just from now, but from ever. He walked faster. Part 5. The library without walls, and the book that knew his name. The silver forest eventually thinned at its eastern edge, and gave way to something Milo had glimpsed on the map, but hadn't fully imagined. The grand library of the Between place. He stopped walking when he saw it, and stood still for a long moment with his mouth open in a way he would later find embarrassing to recall. It had walls, technically, but the walls were made of books. Millions of them, stacked so precisely, and so densely that they had become structural, load-bearing, architectural, rising up into the amber sky as high as Milo could see. Between the book walls, shelves extended in every direction, and these shelves were also full, and more shelves branched off those shelves, and more still from those, until the library was a city unto itself, roofed in the most extraordinary cases by the shelves themselves as they angled and crossed above, dappled light, filtering down through the gaps in a way that made everything inside glow, like late afternoon. "What kind of books?" Milo asked, stepping inside. The floor was worn smooth stone, warm through the soles of his shoes. "All kinds," Codex said, dropping from Sage's shoulder with surprising grace and scuttling along beside them, his 6 hands. "Legs, those are legs," Milo reminded himself, pattering quietly. Stories that were begun and never finished, letters that were written and never sent, diaries that were burned before anyone read them, dreams that were vivid at 3 a.m. and gone by breakfast, ideas that occurred to people and then vanished before they could be written down. The beetle paused beside a shelf and ran one small hand along the spines of a row of books. Every unuttered thought that might have changed something if it had been spoken. They're all here. Milo reached out and touched a spine. The book was warm. Can you read them? Some of them. But reading them is complicated. You read someone else's unfinished story and you become part of it in a way. You carry a bit of their unfinished business. We don't read carelessly here. They walked deeper into the library. Milo kept the map in his hands, consulting it every few minutes. According to his grandfather's notes, there was something in the library they needed, a specific volume that would tell them the exact location of the Heartstone more precisely than the map currently showed. Jasper had called it the Concordance. Your grandfather spent 3 visits looking for it, Sage said, navigating the shelves with the comfort of someone who'd spent a great deal of time here. Did he find it? He found its address, but the library doesn't stay organized the same way twice. Books move. She said this without apparent concern, as if books walking around under their own power was perfectly reasonable. They move, not quickly, and only when no one is watching directly. Codex made a sound that was unmistakably a chuckle. They had been searching for approximately an hour, Milo using a combination of the compass, which he discovered also functioned as a sort of directional guide when he held a specific intention in mind, the needle swinging toward true when he was getting warmer, and his growing instinct for the library's logic. When Milo heard something, it was his name. Not loudly, not from any specific direction. Just Milo, very soft, like a whisper attached to the air rather than to any mouth. He stopped walking. Did you hear that? Sage and Codex both looked at him. Hear what? Sage said. My name. Milo turned slowly. The compass needle had swung hard to true and was trembling there, straining at its axis. He followed it, turning left down a narrow corridor between shelves so tall they met above, forming a tunnel of books. At the end of the corridor was a single book lying flat on the floor, face up, as if it had fallen, or placed itself, right in the middle of the path. Its cover was the deep green of Grandpa Jasper's box, and on it, in the same handwriting, the Concordance of the Heartstone, being a complete record of its location and nature, compiled by those who looked and failed to reach, in hope that those who come after might succeed. And below that, in much smaller, much newer-looking ink, waiting for M. Ashwood. Milo picked it up. It was heavy and warm, and immediately he felt, not exactly heard, but felt, a kind of welcome radiating from it, like meeting someone who had heard a lot about you and decided to like you before you'd done anything to deserve it. Found it, he said. Part 6. What the Concordance said. They made camp in a reading alcove, a circular space carved into the book wall, with cushioned benches and a lamp that burned with a blue-green light that never flickered. Milo sat with the Concordance in his lap and Sage beside him, and Codex perched on the back of the bench. And he read aloud. The Concordance was, as its title suggested, a record compiled by many hands over a very long time. Its earliest entries were in languages Milo couldn't read, but Codex translated without being asked, murmuring the words in a quiet undertone as Milo's finger traced the lines. Later, Milo would note in his own journal that he'd never thought to question how Codex knew every language. It simply felt like something a large beetle with velvet furniture and reading glasses would naturally be able to do. The story the Concordance told was this. The Between place had a heart because all worlds have hearts, a center, the source, a place from which the essential energy of that world radiates outward. In the Between place, this was literal. Deep in the oldest, most central part of the world, the part that had been here since before anything was forgotten by anyone, the part that had been here, the Concordance suggested, since before there was a human world to forget things. There was a stone, not a pebble, not a boulder, something in between, the size of a small table, perfectly smooth, the color of all the colors, and none of them, and warm to the touch in all seasons, and all weathers and all times. The Heartstone gave the between place its purpose. Every forgotten thing that fell into this world was drawn to the Heartstone's warmth, the way seedlings grow toward light. The stone organized the chaos of all that loss into something livable, something with meaning. Without it, the Between place would have been just a dumping ground, a landfill of discarded human experience. With it, the Between place was a cathedral of everything precious that had been misplaced. The Unmaker understood this. That was why the white patches were spreading inward from the edges toward the center. The Unmaker was working methodically, slowly, not rushing, because it didn't need to rush. It would get to the Heartstone eventually. And when it unmade the stone, the Between place would not just fall apart. It would never have existed. And all those things, all the lost songs and the unsent letters and the forgotten faces, Milo started, would be gone from all of existence. Yes, Codex said, not stored somewhere else, not recoverable, simply never having been. But if the map is completed, Milo began. If the Heartstone is mapped properly, truly by a genuine cartographer, it becomes anchored, named. The Unmaker cannot touch named things. That's the rule, and the Unmaker cannot break it any more than fire can choose not to be hot. Codex adjusted his glasses. The map names things. Named things are real in a way that the Unmaker cannot reach. Milo looked at the blank space on his grandfather's map, the empty area near the red X waiting for him. There's a complication, Sage said. She'd been reading ahead in the concordance while Milo processed all of this. She turned it toward him and showed him an entry near the back, written in a clean, careful script. The path to the Heartstone cannot be walked by someone who is unwilling to leave something behind. The stone is surrounded by the deepest memory, the oldest part of the Between place, where the most precious forgotten things are kept. Anyone who walks into the deepest memory will encounter their own deepest loss. They must acknowledge it. They cannot map their way through it while looking away from it. Milo read the passage twice. He thought about his pencil cup at home, all the pencils standing unused. He thought about the sketchbook on the shelf. He thought about his grandfather's handwriting on the box, Cartographer's Apprentice, as if Jasper had known all along. Okay, he said. He closed the concordance. Let's go. Part 7. The Edge of the White and the Battle of the Hollow Men. The path from the library to the Heartstone's location wound through 3 distinct territories of the Between place, all of which Jasper's logbook had described but only partially mapped. The first was the grassland of half-remembered things, exactly what it sounded like. A wide, open plain where objects stood in the grass like a strange museum. An old bicycle with a flower basket, its exact origin impossible to determine. A child's drawing, framed and mounted in the air, of a house that might have been any house. A music box playing a melody too quiet to quite hear. Thousands of objects, all slightly blurry at the edges, as if the world couldn't quite decide on their details. Milo sketched as they walked, quick but careful, his pencil moving faster than he could think. The compass pointed true, and he walked true and slowly. Behind him, the blank space on the map began to fill in. "You're good," Sage said, watching over his shoulder. She said it matter-of-factly, not as a compliment exactly, but as an observation. "I'm okay," Milo said, which was what he always said. "No, you're good. I've watched your grandfather map this place for 30 years. You draw the way he did at the beginning before he learned to be cautious. You draw the way someone does when they see things and trust what they see." A pause. "That's rarer than you think." Milo didn't say anything. He kept drawing. The second territory was harder. It was called, in Jasper's logbook, the Echoing Valleys, a series of steep-sided ravines where sound behaved unexpectedly. Every sound made in the valleys echoed, but the echoes were not copies of the original sound. They were transformed, sometimes into music, sometimes into words, sometimes into sounds that had no analog in the human world, complex and layered and deeply unsettling. It was in the echoing valleys that they encountered the hollow men in numbers, not one or two at a distance as before. 20, perhaps 30, standing in a loose formation across the mouth of the main valley pass, all of them with arms raised, all pointing in different directions. Milo stopped. There are so many of them. The Unmaker sends them when it senses the map being completed. Codex said from Sage's shoulder. His voice was quite calm. They will try to confuse your sense of direction, make the compass seem unreliable, make you doubt the map. How do we get past them? Sage rolled up her sleeves in a businesslike way. I'll handle them. You keep mapping. Don't stop drawing. Whatever happens, keep your eyes on the map and your pencil moving. Sage. I know this place and they don't. Not really. They're borrowed shapes. They have no substance here. She glanced at him, and her two bright eyes were lit with something Milo recognized as excitement. I've been waiting for someone to finish this map for a long time. Milo Ashwood. I'm not going to let a crowd of faceless scarecrows stop it now. She stepped forward. What followed was, to Milo's great frustration, almost entirely invisible to him. Because he was looking at the map and the concordance, and his pencil was moving, mapping the first ravine of the echoing valleys, the subtle curve of the walls, the specific texture of the acoustics that created the echoes. He found, to his astonishment, that he could somehow draw sound, represented in lines the way a sailor represents waves, and the map absorbed these marks with what felt very much like approval. But he heard it, or rather, he heard the echoes of it. Sage moving through the hollow men like water moves through a field, fluid and unhurried, and the hollow men's formation breaking and scattering, and a sound that he didn't have a word for, but that Codex at his shoulder translated as the sound of something that was never quite real, admitting that fact. When he finally looked up, the pass was clear. Sage was standing at the far end of it, waiting, looking completely unruffled, except for one small thread of her gold-woven hair that had come loose and was blowing in the valley wind. Well, she said, are you going to stand there all day? You're incredible, said Milo. I know, she said, without any particular arrogance. Just factually. They walked through the echoing valleys together, and the map grew richer and more detailed with every step, and the blank space near the red X grew smaller, and smaller, and smaller still. Part 8. The deepest memory. The third territory was not in Jasper's logbook. It appeared suddenly at the end of the last ravine. One step, and Milo was in the echoing valleys. The next step, and he was somewhere else entirely. The deepest memory was the oldest part of the Betwing place, and it felt old in the same way a stone cathedral feels old, or a very ancient tree, not as something decayed or retired, but as something that has had a great deal of time to settle into itself and become exactly, precisely what it is. The air was quiet here, not silent, quiet. There was a difference. The light was different too. Warmer, softer, without any visible source, as if the world itself were gently luminous. Things floated here. That was the only word for it. Memories, not objects, exactly, but presences. Drifted in the golden air like dust motes, except that each one held within it the sense of something real, something that had been important to someone somewhere. Milo walked carefully among them, afraid to disturb them, and they drifted around him with a kind of peaceful unconcern. Sage and Codex had stopped at the edge. We can't go further, Sage said. Her voice was strange, careful, almost pained. It's the rule. The deepest memory only permits the one who needs to be there. It recognizes. She paused. It recognizes what each person carries, what they've been trying not to look at. I'll be okay, Milo said. I know, she said. That's not why I'm worried. I'm worried because being okay and finding it easy aren't the same thing. And I want you to know that whatever you see in there, it's real. That's a good thing, not a bad one. The between place wouldn't show you something real if it didn't trust you to hold it. Milo nodded. He took a step forward and another, and the deepest memory received him like water receives a stone, quietly, completely. He walked for what might have been minutes or hours. The presences drifted around him, and he felt each one distantly, like the way you feel the warmth of other people's fires through a window. Someone's memory of the summer afternoon, someone's memory of a face, someone's memory of a piece of music that made them cry in the best way, the way music does when it has located something in your chest that you didn't know was there. And then he stopped walking, because there, drifting in the golden air just ahead of him, was Grandpa Jasper. Not exactly Jasper, not a ghost, not a figment, more like a memory of him, the essence of him, the thing that was most him, distilled from all the years and all the experiences into something quiet and clear. He sat in his attic the way Milo had seen him sit 100 times, bent over a drafting table with a pencil in his hand, the lamp warm on the side of his face. Milo stood very still. He hadn't cried since his grandfather died. He hadn't been able to, and not being able to had scared him, because everyone said crying was important, and he'd felt somehow broken or wrong for being dry-eyed through the funeral and the afterwake and the weeks since. He'd drawn instead, or rather, he'd tried to draw and found his hand wouldn't move, as if the absence of grief expressed in the normal way had gummed up all the other channels too. But now, standing in the deepest memory, with a floating fragment of his grandfather that was made of all the times Jasper had shown him something wonderful and said, "Isn't that remarkable, Milo?" Now, his eyes stung and his throat closed and his vision blurred. The fragment of Jasper looked up from the drafting table. It didn't speak, exactly, but Milo understood. The way you understand things in dreams that can't be said in words, that Jasper had known this might happen, had planned for it in his way. The green box wasn't just a gift, it was an invitation. The map wasn't just unfinished work, it was an unfinished conversation. A cartographer maps what is real, and Jasper had known his own end was real, and the boy who loved drawing was real, and the gap between them was real, and this was his way of saying, "Come find me here, in the place where all the real things are kept." I stopped drawing, Milo told the memory. His voice came out smaller than he expected. After you died, I couldn't. Everything I drew just looked like it was missing you. The memory of Jasper was still, patient, listening in the way his grandfather had always listened, with his whole body, no part of him elsewhere. I think I was afraid that if I got good at it, I'd have to do it without you telling me I was good, and then I'd find out that you were just saying it because you loved me, and not because it was true. Milo wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist. That sounds stupid out loud. It didn't feel stupid in here. But you were right, Milo said. I can see it on the map. I can feel it in how the compass points when I'm drawing truly. I can see it in Sage's eyes when she watches me sketch. He paused. I'm a cartographer. I think I've always been a cartographer. I just needed to find the place that needed to be mapped. The memory of Jasper held, for a moment, very still. And then it did something that Milo would spend years trying to describe and always fail to do properly. It smiled. Not with a face, because it didn't have a face exactly. It smiled the way light smiles when it comes through a window in the morning, by brightening things, just slightly, Just enough. Milo breathed in slowly, breathed out. He took out his pencil. He held the map in his other hand, and he walked, with his eyes open and his hand steady, toward the Heartstone. Part 9. The Heartstone. He almost missed it. That was the thing that surprised him most. How ordinary it looked at first. It sat in a small clearing at the very center of the deepest memory. A stone, the size of a coffee table, smooth and unpretentious, the color that exists between all other colors when you're not looking directly at it. Around it, the golden light was slightly brighter. The drifting memories moved around it in slow orbits, the way debris orbits something with gentle gravity. But when Milo stepped closer, the extraordinariness of it became undeniable. The warmth was the first thing. Genuine, physical warmth, radiating from the stone like a living creature's body heat. Then the sound. Not loud, barely audible, but once he'd heard it, he couldn't unhear it. The stone sang. A low, complex harmony of all the melodies of the silver forest and other sounds besides, all of them woven into a single chord that was somehow more than any individual note. And when he pressed his palm flat against its surface, he understood it. Not in the way you understand words or numbers, in a deeper way, a cellular way. He understood that this stone had been receiving the weight of human loss since the first human lost something, and had held all of it, and turned it into warmth, and that was what it was for. And it was not tired, because holding precious things does not tire the things that are made for it. Milo stepped back. He took a breath. He opened the map. He began to draw. He drew the Heartstone the way it was. Not the way he wished it were, not the way he imagined it should look, but truly, precisely, with every line of his pencil an act of honest observation. He drew its shape, which was slightly irregular and beautiful. He drew the warmth, which he did in a series of curved lines radiating outward like rings in water, and the lines were accurate. He could feel that they were accurate, the compass needle quivering at true with a small, happy persistence. He drew the singing, which translated on paper into a kind of notation he invented on the spot, and which seemed to him self-evidently correct, the way mathematical proofs seem self-evident when you finally understand them. He drew the position of the drifting memories around it, each one a small, careful mark. He drew the quality of the light. He drew the path he'd walked to get here, completing the route from the library through the echoing valleys to this place, and it connected to Jasper's work seamlessly, the two hands fitting together the way interlocking puzzle pieces fit, slightly different in style, identical in purpose. It took a long time. Milo's hand didn't cramp. He didn't feel tired. He felt, for the first time since July, entirely like himself. When he lifted his pencil and looked at what he'd drawn, the completed section of the map was everything it needed to be. He knew it the way you know when a piece of music has been played correctly, or when an equation balances, a felt certainty, located somewhere below thought. He reached into his pocket for the ink bottle, Mapmaker's ink, use only when certain. He broke the black wax seal. The ink was dark and faintly luminous, and it smelled of rain and stone and oranges. Milo uncapped it and carefully, precisely, went over every pencil line with ink. The moment the last line was inked, the map did something extraordinary. It shone. Light came from it, not harshly, not blindingly, just the gold of a perfect afternoon, spreading outward from the completed drawing of the Heartstone and moving along all the other lines of the map, the routes and territories and labels and measurements, until the entire surface of the map was softly glowing. And the light was warm on Milo's face and hands. The Heartstone glowed in response. It brightened, and the chord it sang resolved into something fuller, as if a note that had been missing had just been found. The drifting memories around it moved faster for a moment, joyful, and then settled back into their orbits. And from outside the deepest memory, very distinctly, Milo heard Sage say, "Oh." Part 10. What the Unmaker did and what it could not do. It came then. Milo had no warning except a sudden drop in temperature and the cessation of the Heartstone's warmth, as if something cold and enormous had stepped between him and a fire. He looked up from the map and saw it entering the deepest memory from the direction he hadn't come. The Unmaker was not what he'd expected. He'd imagined something monstrous. Claws, teeth, darkness given appetite. But it wasn't that at all. It was more like an absence. A tall, human-shaped void that moved as a person moves but contained nothing. When he looked at it, his eyes kept sliding away, because there was no detail to hold on to, no surface to focus on, just a shape that shouldn't be there and increasingly wasn't. The drifting memories recoiled from it, retreating toward the Heartstone. The Unmaker moved toward Milo. He stood his ground. He held the map. "The map is complete," he said. His voice came out steady, which surprised him. "The Heartstone is mapped. You can't unmake things that are named." The Unmaker stopped. It didn't have eyes, but the quality of its attention changed, the way the quality of silence changes in a room when someone has heard something unexpected. There was a long moment, terrible and still, in which Milo could feel the weight of the thing's frustration, its incomprehension. It had been working for so long, moving methodically from the edges inward. The white patches growing, the between place shrinking, the end approaching. And now a 10-year-old boy with his dead grandfather's map had stopped it. The Unmaker moved again, directly at Milo. He didn't run. He held up the map. The glow intensified the moment the Unmaker drew close. Not aggressively, not as a weapon, but the way a lamp brightens when someone stumbles in the dark. The light from the completed map fell on the Unmaker, and the Unmaker flinched. Not pain exactly, but something like confusion. Something like encountering a rule it hadn't expected. Names. All the names on the map. The silver forest and its trees of forgotten songs. The library without walls. The echoing valleys and their transformed echoes. The grassland of half-remembered things. The Heartstone itself, named and measured and inked in permanence. All of them real, documented, belonging to the world in a way that predated the Unmaker and would outlast it. The white patches didn't retreat. They couldn't. What was already erased couldn't be recovered, but they stopped growing. Every name on the map was an anchor point, a fixed star the Unmaker couldn't extinguish. And at the center of the web of names was the Heartstone, singing its chord again, full-throated and warm, radiant with the weight of everything it had held and was holding still. The Unmaker stood in the light for a moment. Then it turned, and it walked away, back toward whatever border it had come from. And as it went, it left no white behind it, and its absence was not the same kind of absence it had been before. Not the absence of emptiness, but the absence of something that had simply moved on. Milo exhaled. His knees shook once and then steadied. Sage came through the edge of the deepest memory at a run. Apparently the rules about entering had changed, or she had simply decided not to observe them anymore, and Codex was somehow already on her shoulder despite presumably following at beetle speed. They were both breathing hard and both looking at him with expressions that said many things at once. "The white patches stopped," Sage said. "I saw," said Milo. She looked at the map in his hands, at the golden light still emanating from its surface, at the completed lines of the last section. The section her grandfather had been working toward for 30 years, and this boy had completed in the space of 2 days and 1 night, and 1 walk through the deepest memory. For a moment, Sage's 2 bright eyes were very bright indeed. He would have been very pleased, Codex said quietly. He was looking at the map. "I know," Milo said. And he did. Part 11. Going back. Going back was much less dramatic than arriving, which Milo thought was probably the way it should be. The most important journeys tend to end quietly, without fanfare, with a sense of something settled rather than something won. They returned through the deepest memory, which was calm and warm, and treated them now with what Milo could only describe as affection, through the echoing valleys where the echoes of their footsteps returned to them as a gentle, complex harmony, through the grassland of half-remembered things where the half-remembered objects seemed somehow less blurry at the edges, and through the silver forest where the songs in the trees had grown slightly louder and more distinct. At the edge of the cliff where Milo had first arrived, they stopped. The amber light of the between place had deepened into something richer and quieter, and below the cliff edge the world stretched in every direction in its extraordinary patchwork, and the white patches, Milo counted 7 from this vantage point, pale scars in the landscape, were still no longer growing, the edges of each one sharp and final but going no further. The between place won't heal overnight, Codex said. He had climbed to Milo's shoulder. Apparently, the shoulder-sitting arrangement rotated, and was surveying the landscape with his glasses perched precisely. The white patches will remain. Those lost things cannot be recovered, but the erosion has stopped, and the heartstone is permanent now. What remains will remain. A pause. In time, new forgotten things will fall here from the human world. They always do. Humans are wonderfully prolific forgetters, and the empty areas will slowly fill again. That's a strange kind of hope, Milo said. All hope is strange, Codex said, with the air of someone who has given this subject considerable thought. It is one of hope's best features. Milo looked at Sage. She had been walking beside him since the Heartstone, and she'd been quieter than usual, and he'd been trying to figure out how to ask the question he needed to ask without making it awkward. He didn't fully succeed. "Can you come with me?" "Back, I mean? To my world?" Sage was quiet for a moment. She looked at the between place spread below them, at the silver thread of the forest, and the floating village, and the library roof glinting in the distance. She looked at Milo. "I belong here," she said, not sadly, just truthfully. "I'm made of this place. I couldn't go to your world any more than you could live here permanently." A small smile. "But the map can go with you. And the map connects here to there, the way cartography always connects places. You can," she paused, and something in her expression became very careful. "You can come back."